let's hope that this is working. Last night I was having all kinds of troubles with the live stream working. For whatever reason, it would just stop. It would give me a few seconds and stop. So here's trying. It's working. It's not closing down on me. So this is wonderful. Good morning. Good Sabbath morning. We're continue through where we left off. It's turning out that I'm enjoying doing these in the mornings. It's like what better way to get up in the morning than to get up and dive into the Word, dive into God's book. Let's start with prayer. I know that this is a progress in work. Like I mentioned last night, this is not a natural forte for me. I'm not a social mediaite. Is that the right word? I'm not a socialite. I'm not a socialite. I'm not constantly on different social platforms and doing daily blogs and updates and posting what I'm eating right now and how my days go. I don't do that. And so doing this has been it's been an experience, or it's been a learning process. Anyway, so let's go ahead and pray before we do this, before we read. In Jesus, Father in heaven, thank you for this wonderful morning, this beautiful Sabbath morning, Father. Thank you for the gift and the joy that the Sabbath is. That you, Father, love us so much that you give us a day of rest, Father. Thank you for what it means to be able to let go of our cares and our worries and rest in you, Father, and spend a day communing with you and getting to know you and focusing our hearts and our minds on you. Father, help us at this time to understand your word. That, Father, that you will speak to us, that you will open our minds in a way that you have never done before, and allow us to understand the things that you have written, Father, in new light. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're going to pick up, if you remember, in chapter 37, Joseph had been sold into Egypt, and it was specific in saying that he was 17 years old. So we're going to pick up in chapter 38, verse 1. And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Adamite whose name was Hira. Now it's interesting. We're going to get into names a little bit again. That an Adamite. Who are the Adamites? We don't know. This is the first time it is mentioned. But apparently, according to the concordances, Adamite means justice of the people. So there's something to do with justice, something to do with honesty, with integrity. So the Adamites, maybe they were a democracy. I don't know. But it's interesting, their name means justice of the people. And the name Hira, who's Judah's friend, means noble family. So it seems to me that Judah was rubbing elbows with a person of respect, a person of integrity. I might be wrong. I don't know. Why would Hira be named at his birth? Was it his name at birth, or was it his name he assumed as an adult? We don't know. We know that happens. But he was someone of nobility, and he came from a land called the justice of the people. So, for whatever it's worth, that's what that means. Another thing to take into consideration is it says at the very beginning, and it came to pass at that time. So it seems that this event that's about to take place, that we're about to read about, occurs shortly after Joseph is sold into Egypt. And it would make sense considering the amount of time that we're going to cover in this chapter. In this chapter, we cover potentially 20-some years. So definitely Joseph, it would have happened fairly soon after Joseph was sold into Egypt. Verse 2, and Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went in unto her. So he takes a Canaanite wife, which we know since Abraham was instructed not to, or Abraham instructed Isaac not to take a Canaanite wife. Isaac instructed Jacob not to take a Canaanite wife. And for those children, Ishmael and Esau, who did take Canaanite wives, they caused their parents grief. Was it just because there was some ideological differences? We're not sure why it is. I personally believe it has to do with the law of God. That these women were not raised in the ways of in the law of God. Therefore, their idolatry, I don't seem severe, but their wickedness that's crept into their lives would affect their husbands. And we see that with Ishmael and Esau. That they were not up, they didn't walk before God. They didn't walk righteously before God. So here's the children of Jacob, the children of Israel. And Judah is the fourth son of Leah's. So if we work through the math and whatnot, Judah's probably somewhere around 20, maybe 21, 22, but he's at the marrying age. And Judah was probably 20 or so when Jacob was sold. So we don't know exactly how quickly after, but it seems it was fairly soon after Joseph was sold into Egypt. So verse 3, and she conceived and bare a son, and he called his name So what does mean? Means awake. When was born, what would cause Judah's wife or Judah to call him awake? Now we don't know Judah's wife's name. We know that her father's name was Shua. That wasn't her name. Just that he took a wife, a Canaanite wife. Verse 4. And she conceived again and bare a son and called his name Onan. Onan means strength. Maybe this child was a strong child. My wife jokes at it sometimes. But my wife Latuana is unnaturally strong. She's the smallest woman I've ever been involved with or had a relationship with. I'm talking about, girlfriends and whatnot before I'm married. She's the strongest woman I've ever met. And she's one of the smallest women I've ever met. And it used to shock me. And then I met her dad. Her dad is every bit as small as she is. I mean, her dad's smaller than I am. But he is unnaturally strong. He's got like this strong gene in him. And we have one of our sons is taking that. He's unnaturally strong. And so maybe when Onan was born, he was naturally just a strong child or baby. Don't know. Verse 5. And she said, she yet again conceived and bare a son and called his name Shelah. And he was at Chezeb when she bare him. Now this one gets interesting because his name Shelah means petition, a request. and whether he was, it makes very specifically he was born in Kazib. Now, where's Kazib? What does Kazib mean? Kazib means false. So what was going on? They were in a city that was called False, and Shelah, meaning a petition. I don't know. See, these are the things that I would absolutely love to be able to be a fly on the wall and see the greater picture and context of what was going on, to what influenced their parents to name them these names, and how Kazib came to be Kazib, which means false, a city that's named False. I don't know. Maybe there's a lot of fool's gold there. I don't know, but it's just interesting. Verse 9. And Onan knew that the seed. Oh, I'm sorry. Nope. Way ahead of myself. Verse 6. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. Now, Tamar just means palm tree. This becomes significant. Now, when we're talking about chronology, so shortly after Joseph is sold into Egypt, Judah goes and takes a Canaanite wife. He has children. Now his oldest child is marrying age. He's old enough to have a wife and have children. How old is that? We don't know. We're not sure. But it just gives you context of how much time has elapsed since Joseph was sold into Egypt. And this is where there's a number of places in the Bible where you carry two narratives at the same time. And here we're going to see the narrative of the children of Israel, and then we're going to pick up with the narrative of Joseph, and then they're going to come back together. But they're separate timelines happening at the same time, or they're separate events happening at the same time. So he took a wife for, verse 6, and Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. Verse 7, and Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. Whew. All right, here's where we get into God's omnipotence, his understanding. God does not kill all men that are wicked. Because we see that, we have married couples all the time in the Bible that are very wicked. God doesn't destroy them. But there's something coming into play here that we'll understand later. Tamar is a very important figure in the lineage of the Messiah. I'll leave it at that. We'll come back to that. So her first husband is a wicked man. And here's what's interesting is verse 7, the Lord. We're talking about Yahweh. We're talking about his name. We're giving his name, Yahweh, Jehovah. Wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. We see it in the Bible, God slaying or removing key figures in the Bible. But you got to understand that's such a small percentage of the total people that are alive. God wasn't going around and just killing anybody that was wicked. He had, for those he did kill, there was a very specific, unique reason. It wasn't just anybody that defies me dies. So for whatever reason, there was some significance with in the fact that he was wicked. God could not allow his wickedness to continue. Verse 7. Verse 8, sorry. And Judah said unto Onan, Go in unto thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up seed by thy brother. Here's something that's interesting. If you look up Onan in Strong's Concordance, it talks about the second son of Judah who failed to abide by the Levitical laws of marriage. I found that very interesting because the Levitical laws had not been established yet, or at least as far as we understand it in the law of Moses. Levi and the Levitical laws don't come into play until 450, 500 years after this. So to give reference to Levitical laws before the law of Moses, I found it just kind of interesting. Now, me personally, I believe that the law of Moses was not a new thing. That the law of Moses as a whole, now there might be some specifics within the law of Moses, but the law of Moses as a whole was not a new thing. These were the laws, statutes, and commandments that God spoke about to Abraham earlier, that we read about earlier in the Bible. So there were, I believe that there were still the laws of marriage at this time were very similar to the laws in Moses, or in the marriage laws in the law of Moses. That if a husband dies, it's up to the responsibility of the brother to take that wife and to have children by that wife for her son, his brother, as if his brother was still alive. But again, this is well before the law of Moses. And I remember the first time I remember reading this was in a theology class. A theology class in, was it middle school? Or was it high school? I think it was high school. It was high school. My theology teacher blushed when he read this and laughed at this, and it was his preface to say that the Bible sometimes is very graphic, which it is. The Bible is not a child's book. We picture religion, we picture faith as something that is pure, is something that is child friendly. Life is not child friendly. We do what we can as parents to protect our children and to slowly acclimate them to the wickedness of the world. So the Bible is about life. It's about reality. It's about the world as it is. And so it speaks in terms of the way it is. We see that with God wiping out all the people with Noah. We see that with, we read about Lot and his two daughters. There's some things in the Bible that are uncomfortable, but the truth of it is there's a lot of things in life that are uncomfortable. There's a lot of things in life that are not pretty. And it's how we react to those things. It's how we carry our lives, our own personal lives. Would I have relations with my daughters? Absolutely not. So let's keep reading. That's just a preface, okay? So, verse 9. So Onan takes his brother Ur, takes Tamar to wife. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his. So whatever children he has by Tamar are not his children, are not his posterity, will be counted to his brother. So whatever wealth is gained by those children will not be his. They will be as if his brother was still alive. And it came to pass when he went in unto her, his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. So he refused to allow Tamar to have children. He indulged in his own personal satisfaction, his own physical gratification relations with Tamar, but he would not fulfill the mandate or the laws, statutes, and commandments to raise up seed for his brother. Now, we don't know that Onan was already married. Probably not. So there was nothing to say that Onan couldn't take on another wife in addition to Tamar, or that he already had a wife in addition to Tamar, where he could raise up seed for himself. But he was so selfish that he refused to give Tamar any children. So what happens? Verse 10, and the thing which he did displeased the Lord, Yahweh, Jehovah, wherefore he slew him also. Then said Judah to Tamar, this daughter-in-law remain a widow at thy father's house, till Shelah my son be grown. For he said, lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So Onan, was old enough to have a wife. Onan was also old enough to have a wife. So it seems to me that would have been a young husband, which he was. Onan would have been even younger, maybe, and this very Tamar very well could have been his first wife, but his third son, Shelah, was not old enough. Shelah was probably somewhere in his mid to late teens. Definitely old enough to have children, but not old enough to take on the responsibility of wife, because back then, marriage was not what it is today. It was a very different mentality about wife. Sadly today, getting married is a Disney dream where you live happily ever after. There's very little thought about commitment to raising children and having children with your wife. All you're thinking about as a young guy is having a girlfriend you can live with. So Shelah would have been physically capable of having children, but he wasn't mature enough to take on that responsibility to raise up a family. And so, I mean, obviously so, Judah's concerned because his first two sons have already died, and he's thinking, something's up here. Now, who is this Tamar? We don't know, but for whatever reason, there was significance with this Tamar that God found favor in Tamar. There's no other explanation in this. There was something about Tamar that pleased God. We don't know what that is. It's not spoken about. But if it were not the case, God would have never killed and then Onan and preserved Tamar. Tamar, had she been a wicked, idolatrous woman, God may have killed her too, or they would have never been mentioned whatsoever. Verse 11, then said Judah to Tamar his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at thy father's house till Shelah my son is grown. For he said, lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So she went back to her own father. She didn't stick around, and she wasn't living with Judah. She went back to her family and was waiting, because obviously she had been living in some way according to the law, statutes, and commandments of God, because she, rather than saying, fine, I don't have any children, I'm tired of y'all Hebrews, I'm tired of your sons, Judah, I'm going to go find me a husband among the Canaanites. No, she was being patient and waiting on the promise that Judah had represented, being that according to the law, statutes, and commandments, that Judah's younger son would take her as wife. I mean, because if you think about it, she had no children. There's no reason why she couldn't have found another man. Another man would have been attracted to her. Absolutely. but she was holding on to the promise of God. So there's something to be said about Tamar. She was not the typical Canaanite. Let's put it that way. There was something about her. Verse 12, and in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted and went up unto his sheep shearers to Timnath, he and his friend Hira the Adamite. Okay, again, here's Hira the Adamite. Hira must have been a very good friend of Judah, because it's been probably 20 some odd years and they're still close friends, and they're still, maybe they're business partners. Maybe Hira the Adamite is a proselyte. Maybe he's, I don't know. It's kind of interesting. We don't know much about him. And it was told Tamar, saying, behold, thy father-in-law goeth up to Timnath to shear his sheep. So obviously it's been years have passed, because Shelah is now old enough to be married. What age is that? Some would speculate 20 years old is the age of what's the word? Here in the West, in America, 18 makes you an adult. It might have been that 20 was the number. Because we know with the children of Israel, all men were counted that were 20 years and older. If you were younger than 20, you weren't counted among the men of Israel. You were still considered an adolescent. So it may be that he was 16, 17, 18 when his brothers die, and now he's 20. He's of the age to be, he's considered a man by the customs. And she is ready to be married and given children. Verse 14, and she put her widow's garments off from her, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which is by the way to Timnath. And she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot, because she had covered her face. And he turned unto her by the way, and said, go to, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee. For he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what wilt thou give me, that thou mayest come in unto me? And he said, I will send thee a kid from the flock. And she said, wilt thou give me a pledge till thou send it? So she's dressed up. She's put a veil over her face. I guess it was custom of prostitutes to put a veil on their face. So she was unrecognizable. I'm sure in normal circumstances, like I said, she wanted to be a part of Judah's family. She wanted to be a part of the promise. This is my own interpretation. That Tamar somehow, somewhere, understood the covenant people of God. She understood who Jacob was in the whole grand scheme of things. She understood who Judah was a son of, and she wanted to be counted among the children of Israel. And that's why she was patient. And therefore, she would have carried herself such. And we see that she was obviously an honorable woman, because she didn't go chasing after men. She had to put on a costume, if you will, to act like a harlot. Normally, I would imagine she was probably a very plain, very chaste, very honorable woman. We don't know this. We could even go so far that maybe God visited Tamar and said, I want you to raise up children. I want you to be, I'm going to do something through your lineage. And so she was it seems to me that Tamar was a righteous woman with God. Does that excuse what she's doing? That's a hard one, because what she is doing, is she sinning by what she's doing? I don't think so. Because Judah is failing to fulfill his responsibility by giving her to his last son, his third son. And so she takes matters into her own hands. It's very possible that she knew that the Messiah was going to be part of her lineage. We don't know. It's one of those things that just makes you think. So she dresses up as a harlot, brings Judah in, or Judah passes by and says, "Hey, how much for your services?" And he agrees to give her a goat, a small kid. You got to understand that coin was not as common. Barter and trade through livestock and commodities or physical property was more common than interacting with coin. So he promises to give her a kid. He says, "How can I trust you? You say you're going to come back and bring me a kid because you have nothing now. I need proof. I need your driver's license." So he gives her his signet, he gives her his staff, and he gives her a bracelet. Each of these were probably very significant and known to be Judah's, especially the signet. A signet, traditionally, we understand signets today to be a ring. We see it in a lot of movies where somebody is wearing this big gaudy ring that has a specific stamp on it, and when you press it into wax, it leaves a mark, and that mark being Rome, being a predominant house. It's known. So here, Judah was well known, or at least Jacob was well known. Somehow, these items would directly link Judah to these events. Unmistakably. And we'll see that. So we're at verse 18. And he said, "What pledge shall I give thee?" And she said, "Thy signet, thy bracelet, and thy staff, that is in thine hand." And he gave it, and came in unto her, and she conceived by him. And she arose, and went away, and laid by her veil from her, and put on the garments of her widowhood. So immediately she goes back to being the moral, the virtuous woman, is exactly what she was. Verse 20. And Judah sent the kid by the hand of his friend, the Adamite, who was obviously Hira, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not. Then he asked the men of the place, saying, "Where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside?" And they said, "There's no harlot in this place." So obviously, in this surrounding area, a harlot would have been a woman of business. She would have carried on business. It probably, back then, harlots weren't necessarily done in secrecy. She was sitting in the open with a veil, presenting herself as a harlot. And if she'd been a prostitute for enough time, people in the area would know her business, would know her stream of income, would know her career or whatever her livelihood. So Herod's going back and asking, and everybody's like, "No, there's no prostitute in this area. We don't know who you're talking about." Then he asked the men of the place, verse 21, saying, "Where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside?" And they said, "There's no harlot in this place." And he returned to Judah and said, "I cannot find her." And also the men of the place said that there was no harlot in this place. Verse 23, and Judah said, "Let her take it to her, lest we be shamed. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her." So Judah is afraid that whoever this woman is is going to use it for extortion. That she might show up and say, this man came, like what was ironically what Joseph would be accused of. That this man came into me and took advantage of me and left me these things, and this proves his offenses. So Judah is a little concerned that somehow, somewhere, she's this extortion, this what's the word? I can't think of the word. When somebody has pictures of you committing an affair and are want to take money or get money out of you without. So what's that called? That's called blackmail. He's afraid that whoever that woman was is going to want to blackmail. But he's saying that it is witnessed here with my friend that I have sent the goat, the kid, according to our agreement. Therefore, I have not offended this woman in any way. It was a consensual thing. She had asked for a goat, and I tried to deliver it to her, and she wasn't there. Verse 24. And it came to pass after 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar thy daughter-in-law hath played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, Bring her forth and let her be burnt. So Tamar obviously was just barely starting to show. She was only 3 months along, barely starting to show. And Judah was angry because she had not done according to what she was supposed to. She had not played the virtuous woman and waited on her son, waited on his son. So Judah, in his rashness, and we see this later with David when he's confronted about Uriah, or about Uriah's wife. That first off, Judah he's showing anger, he's showing consternation that his daughter-in-law is playing him a fool, that she is out harloting and whoring around, pretending to be someone else, which in a way was true, but not because of her selfishness, not because she was a wicked woman. She did that in necessity. Verse 25. And she was brought forth. She said, I love this. She was brought forth. She said to her father-in-law, saying, By the man whose these things are, I am with child. And she said, Discern, I pray thee, whose are these, the signet, the bracelet, and the staff. So he hears about it. He's angry. He says, Bring her to me. And so she comes before him, answering the charges of adultery and harlotry. Because if you can understand, she's promised to his youngest son. So for her to be having relations with any other man is adultery. So she comes to him and says, Oh, Judah, by the way, whose are these? And it's obvious, Judah knows exactly what she's talking about. He knows exactly what she has. And he is caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Verse 26, And Judah acknowledged them and said, She hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah my son. And he knew her again no more. We see something here. Yes, Judah's a mess. We see that a number of Jacob's sons are a mess. We see the family drama they bring upon themselves. But over and over and over, the difference between a man that God loves and a man that has mercy, or a man that God has mercy on, and when he doesn't, is a repentant heart. It seems to me that and Onan, Judah's first two sons, didn't have that in them. We see that even the wickedest king, what was his name? I want to say Rahab. No, it's not. The wickedest king of Israel, the husband to Jezebel. God came and said, I'm going to wipe you out. I'm going to wipe out your children. I'm going to wipe you out from the face of the earth. And your kingship ends here. See, for those kings that were righteous, God allowed for there to be a dynasty, meaning that God allowed for kings' children to become kings. For an example, David's son, Solomon was David's son, biological son. And only because David was righteous did God allow one of his children to continue as king. Israel, in a way, was a dynastic kingdom, only if the kings were righteous. Because if the kings were wicked, God, he had no patience. He would wipe them out, and he would remove not only the king, but his children and his boys, so that none of the children could come back and claim kingship. And he did, and we see this with the husband of Jezebel. God tells him, look, I've had enough of you. You're the most wicked king of all of Israel. You're done. You're going to die, and your children are going to die. And immediately he fasts, and he seeks forgiveness. And God says, okay, I will spare your life. Your children are not going to follow your kingship. But I will at least spare your life. And I think that's the case here with Judah. The fact that Judah was willing to, he didn't try to kill her and sweep this under the rug and cover it up, that he immediately recognized the sin in himself and said, you know what? You're right. I gave you no other choice to do but what you did, because I refused to give you my son, Shelah. And we see that reflected in David. The reason why David was so beloved by God wasn't because he was the most righteous king. It's because he was so willing to accept and concede to God. Accept God as the final authority and recognize his own flaws, and he'd say, you know, God, I'm sorry. I was wrong. We see this with Cain and Abel. Had Cain, when God was displeased with Cain's offering, had Cain said, God, you know what, I'm sorry, you're right, it would have been a completely different situation. God would have been pleased with Cain. Cain would have been accepted. But he chose to be bitter and angry by it. So, I think the key here is Judah's response. And Judah is saying, you know what, you're right. You're right. You were more righteous than me, because you have maintained and been a virtuous woman, and you did what you had to do because I refused to administer to you the justice of the laws, commandments, and statutes. Verse 26, and Judah acknowledged them and said, she hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah my son, and he knew her again no more. See, again, it's just my own thinking. It's not in the scriptures. But I think Tamar understood the importance of being attached or being connected to Judah. That she knew that she would be in the lineage of the Messiah. And so what she did was not wickedness. What she did was fulfilling what was promised to her. And I think Judah, I don't know that Judah recognizes this. I don't know that Judah knows that the Messiah is going to come through his line. Again, this is my speculation. I'm just trying to understand why Tamar was so significant. Because very few women are mentioned in the Bible. But when they are, there's a reason. There's a very specific, very significant reason. And so Tamar, who you would think would just be a passing story, some Canaanite woman that Judah gave to his son, had, seduced Judah and had a child by him. There's more to it than that, because God would not work in wickedness. Yes, God works through wicked people, but he doesn't work wickedness. So, it'd be interesting to see who Tamar was. We know that she was a Canaanite, which means that she was the lineage of Ham. Here's another thing to think about. So this means that Jesus, we know that Tamar is one of the line of that Jesus has come through. Tamar was a Canaanite, which she was a descendant of Ham. So therefore, Jesus was a descendant of Ham, or had Ham's blood within him. Now I could go on a tangent with this. I could go. There's a lot to go with this, but I'm not going to take the time to do that right now. But Jesus' lineage was not wholly confined to Shem. Was not wholly confined to the righteous and the righteous son of Noah, the eldest son of Noah, the birthright son of Noah. No, he had within him Ham, who was chastised. So it just shows that God is no respecter of persons. God is a respecter of a man's heart, of a man's walk with him. God doesn't care who your parentage is, who your lineage is, who your ancestry is. What he cares about is your walk with him. Are you a righteous? Are you a right standing? Are you someone who seeks to follow God's commandments and be humble and repentant? That's all that God cares about. He doesn't care about family lineage. Yes, we will read about Israel, but we got to understand, we're taught so much that it's all about lineage. It isn't about lineage at all. And we're going to see more about that. I'll leave it at that. That's another rabbit trail. Verse 27. Or back in verse 26. And he knew her no more. So he gave her this one child, but he never had any more relations with her. That was the last and only child he gave to her. So again, it seems to me that God had given Tamar a promise. And now that she has the one son, that promise has been fulfilled. Similar to Abraham. God gave a promise to Abraham. So, verse 27, and it came to pass in the time of her travail that, behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass that when she travailed, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. And it came to pass, as he drew it back, his hand, that behold, his brother came out, and she said, how has this broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Pharez. And afterward came out the brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was Zara. Let's see what their names mean, Pharez and Zara. Pharez means breach. So somehow, the hand of Zara came out first, but then was pulled back in, and the first baby that was born breech, which means butt first. To have a name meaning breech. And Zara, meaning rising. So, what we see here is God's mercy, God working through the least of us. Jesus did not come to this earth claiming that he was of a noble royal birthright. He was. But he was also of a Canaanite birthright, which was the worst, the dirtiest, the least of all birthrights. Throughout Israel, there was a disdain for Canaanites. Canaanites were the descendants of Ham. They were full of idolatry. They were full of wickedness. And they wanted to separate themselves from them. But here we see that Jesus was of the lineage of both. That ultimate righteousness came through wickedness. That Jesus' lineage includes the worst of the lineage of Canaan. Canaanites. God hated Canaanites, but yet here God was fulfilling a promise. Tamar must have been a remarkable woman, because God is not one. There's no, for good or bad. The only time women are mentioned in the Old Testament are because they were significant. Jezebel is mentioned because she caused a lot of problems. But then we read about Ruth, and we read why Ruth was significant. We read about other women, why they were significant. So Tamar, there's more to the story than what we see here. And it would be wonderful to understand the story of Tamar, who she was to God, what her walk with God was like. But we're just left with a little tidbit. And we know that Jesus comes from the line of Tamar, comes from the line of Judah. All right, I can sit here and wander about this and go on and on and on and rabbit trails, because there are many, many, many. But we'll leave it at this. Read your Bible, and man, if you don't feel like you are torn away from your Bible, then you're missing it. Because every time I have to put my Bible down and stop reading it, I feel a longing to read more. It's rare that I read enough to where I feel like, okay, I've read enough, I'm feeling complete. It's got to become alive. It's got to become a part of who you are inside. In a way, become an addiction. Become an addiction that you can't get enough of. That you got to read it, and you want to read it, and you want to study it. So, with that, read your Bible and have a wonderful morning.